of the result of the process of the reciprocal destruction of two opposite forces, or as ordinary beings express it, the cause of artificial light. The striving to reblend into a whole of two active parts of the omnipresent Okidanoch, which is proceeding at the present moment there in this vacuum, has a force, as calculated by objective science, of 3,040,000 what are called volts, and this force is indicated by the needle of that special appliance there. Pointing to a something very much like the apparatus existing also on your planet and called their voltmeter, he said, "One of the advantages of this new invention of mine for the demonstration of the given phenomena is that in spite of the unusual power of the process of the force of striving, now proceeding there, the what are called Salnichitsin-Nuarnian momentum vibrations, which most beings consider also to be rays, and which ought to be obtained and to issue from this process, do not issue out of the place of their arising, that is, out of this construction in which the particularities of the omnipresent Okidanok are being elucidated. And in order that the beings who are outside of this part of my invention may nevertheless also have the possibility of elucidating the force of the given process, I intentionally made the composition of the material of the wall in one place, such that it has the property of permitting the passage through it of the said Salnichitsin-Nuarnian momentum vibrations or rays." Having said this, he approached nearer to the Krahahartzaha and pressed a certain button. The result was that the whole of the enormous Kar, or workshop, was suddenly so strongly lit up that our organs of sight temporarily ceased to function, and only after a considerable time had passed could we with great difficulty raise our eyelids and look around. When we had recovered and Gunahur Harhark had pulled still another lever, which resulted in the whole surrounding space being restored to its former usual appearance, he first, with his customary angel voice, again drew our attention to the voltmeter, the needle of which constantly indicated the same figure, and then continued, "You see that although the process of the clash of two opposite component parts of the omnipresent Okidanoch, of the same power of force of striving, still continues, and that the part of the surface of this construction which has the property of admitting the passage of the said rays is still open, yet, in spite of all this, there is no longer the phenomenon which ordinary beings define by the phrase, the causes of artificial light. And this phenomenon is no longer there because, by my last pulling of a certain lever, I introduced into the process of the clash of two component parts of Okidanoch a current of the third independent component part of Okidanoch, which began to blend proportionately with its other two parts, owing to which the result derived from this kind of blending of the three component parts of the omnipresent Okidanoch, unlike the process of the non-law conformable blending of its two parts, cannot be perceived by beings with any of their being functions. After all these explanations of his, Gornahur Harhark then proposed that I should venture to enter with him that demonstrating part itself of his new invention, in order that I might become, there within, an eye-witness of many particular manifestations of the omnipresent and everything-penetrating active element. Of course, without thinking long about it, I immediately decided and gave him my consent. And I immediately decided chiefly because I expected to obtain in my being unchangeable and imperishable objective essence satisfaction. When this future essence friend of mine had my consent, he at once gave the necessary orders to one of his assistants. It appeared that for the actualization of what he proposed, various preparations had first to be made. First of all, his assistants put on Gornahor Harhar and myself some special very heavy suits, resembling those which your favorites call diving suits, but with many small heads of what are called bolts projecting. And when these extremely peculiar suits had been put on us, his assistants screwed up the heads of these bolts in a certain order. On the inner side of these diving suits, at the end of the bolts, there were, it appeared, special plates which pressed against parts of our planetary body in a certain way. It later also became quite clear to me that this was necessary, in order that there might not occur to our planetary bodies what is called Tara Nuranura, or, as it might otherwise be said, in order that our planetary bodies should not fall to pieces as usually occurs to sur- and intraplanetary formations of every kind when they happen to come into an entirely atmosphereless space. In addition to these special suits, they placed on our heads a something resembling what is called a diver's helmet, but with very complicated what are called connectors projecting from them. One of these connectors, which was called the Har Harin Rach, meaning sustainer of pulsation, was something long like a rubber tube. One end of it, by means of complicated appliances on the helmet itself, was hermetically attached to the corresponding place of the helmet for the breathing organs, while the other end, after we had already entered that strange Har Ha Hartzaha, was screwed to an apparatus there, which was connected in its turn with the space, the presence of which corresponded to the second being food. Between Gornahor Harhak and myself, there was also a special connector, through which we could easily communicate with each other while we were inside the Har Ha Hartzaha, from which the atmosphere was pumped out to make a vacuum. One end of this connector also, by means of appliances that were on the helmets, was fitted in a certain way to what are called my organs of hearing and speech, and the other end was fitted to the same organs of Gornahor Harhak. Thus, by means of this connector between my subsequent essence friend and myself, there was set up, as again your favorites would say, a peculiar telephone. Without this appliance, we could not have communicated with each other in any way, chiefly because Gornahor Harhak was at that time still a being with a presence perfected only up to the state called the sacred Inkozarno. And a being with such a presence not only cannot manifest himself in an absolutely empty space, but he cannot even exist in it, even though the products of all the three being foods be artificially introduced into him in such a space. But the most curious, and as it is said, the most cunningly ingenious of all the connectors there for various purposes on those strange diving suits and helmets, was the connector created by that great scientist Gornahor Harhach to enable the organ of sight of ordinary beings to perceive the visibility of all kinds of surrounding objects in an absolutely empty space. One end of this astonishing connector was fitted in a certain way also by means of appliances on the helmets.